So starting with you, Jewelle, I wanted to ask, first of all, which is the book that you selected and why?
I selected James Baldwin's Giovanni's Room, perhaps because I just finished writing a play all about James Baldwin writing Giovanni's Room, and the conflict that he encountered from both political activists as well as literary figures who did not want him to publish a book that's essentially about the tragic love affair between a Frenchman and a white American in France in the 50s. The feeling was that there was so much going on politically in the civil rights movement. Emmett Till had been recently murdered. A number of civil rights actions were enacted, and the sense that a homosexual novel by an popular African-American activist and writer would do nothing but detract from the movement. And he was also told it would, basically ruin his career because he was a very popular writer for mainstream magazines. And so, obviously he did publish it, but I wrote a lot about what that must have been like for an author to be thinking he's creating something that could damage a movement that was so close to his heart.
When the book came out, was it banned in other places? Was it banned, for example, from
originally it was published in Europe because he had so much trouble getting it done here. And then when it was published here, it wasn't banned, although I think it was banned in certain libraries for perhaps today still, and certain school systems. But it met with more like puzzlement. And the reviewers, you know how you damn with faint praise, they couldn't figure out why he'd written it, what it meant. They were so focused on the fact that he was an African American, they could not perceive what interest he might have in writing about a young poor man in France. And were unable to see that the book was really about colonialism, was about class exploitation, as well as about how much self-hatred as a gay man could ruin one's life.
Would you like to read something?
I picked out two short sections. For those who don't know the story, it's a fairly tragic love story about a very poor Italian who lives in France, who's a bartender, and how he's exploited by various men with whom he has affairs, including the American David, who's a tourist in Paris at the time. And this takes place after Giovanni has been condemned to die at the guillotine for murdering one of the men who had exploited him. And this is David returning to France. I repent now for all the good it does. One particular lie among the many lies I've told, lived, and believed. This is the lie which I told to Giovanni, but never succeeded in making him believe that I had never slept with a boy before. I had decided that I would never again. There is something fantastic in the spectacle I now present to myself for having run so far, so hard, across the ocean even, only to find myself brought up short once more before the bulldog in my own backyard. The yard, in the meantime, having grown smaller and the bulldog bigger. I have not thought of that boy, Joey, for many years, but I see him quite clearly tonight. It was several years ago. I was still in my teens. He was about my age, give or take a year. He was a very nice boy, too, very quick and dark, and always laughing. For a while, he was my best friend. It was in the summer. There was no school. His parents had gone someplace for the weekend, and I was spending the weekend in his house, which is near Coney Island in Brooklyn. We lived in Brooklyn, too, in those days, but in a better neighborhood than Joey's. I think we had been lying around the beach, then I think it began in the shower. I know that I felt something as we were horsing around in that small, steamy room, stinging each other with wet towels, which I had not felt before, which mysteriously and yet aimlessly included him. I remember in myself a heavy reluctance to get dressed. I blamed it on the heat, but we did get dressed, sort of, and we ate cold things out of his icebox and drank a lot of beer. We must have gone to the movies. When we came back along those streets, it was quiet. We were quiet too. We were very quiet in the apartment and sleepily got undressed in Joey's bedroom and went to bed. I fell asleep for quite a while, I think. But I woke up to find the light on and Joey examining the pillow with great ferocious care. What's the matter? I think something bit me. You slob, you got bed bugs? I think one bit me. You ever have a bed bug bite you before? No. Well, go back to sleep, you're dreaming. He looked at me with his mouth open and his dark eyes very big. It was as though he had just discovered that I was an expert in bed bugs. I laughed and grabbed his head as I had done God knows how many times before when I was playing with him or when he had annoyed me. But this time, when I touched him, something happened in him and in me, which made this touch different from any touch either of us had ever known. And he did not resist as he usually did, but lay where I had pulled him against my chest. And I realized that my heart was beating in an awful way, and that boy Joey was trembling against me, and the light in the room was very bright and hot. I started to move and make some kind of joke, but Joey mumbled something and I put my head down to hear. Joey raised his head as I lowered mine and we kissed, as it were, by accident. Then, for the first time in my life, I was really aware of another person's body, of another person's smell. We had our arms around each other. It was like holding in my hand some rare, exhausted, nearly doomed bird, which I had miraculously happened to find. I was very frightened, and I was sure he was frightened too when we shut our eyes. To remember it so clearly, so painfully tonight tells me I have never for an instant truly forgotten it. I feel in myself now a faint, dreadful stirring of what was so overwhelmingly stirred in me then. Great, thirsty